Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished leader from Belgium, Eve Vlemincx. Eve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Eve
it's my
is,
honor.
Thank you. Eve is an attorney involved in enabling strategic innovation. She is associated with purposeful profit, culture, turnaround, and transformation export. She has received 4 Stanford GSB Intellectual Contribution Awards. She's a board member, and in her own words, she's a moonshot thinker. So, Eve, let's start with your early life as a lawyer. Tell me some of the highlights.
Fortunately, there are plenty of highlights. For me, making a difference, having a positive impact has always been my true line in life and in my career. I've always practiced business law, but also when it's about organizations, in the end, it's all about people. My real highlights are the cases in which I could really make a difference. For example, I think of a case of a young businessman, things went sour, everything was at stake. Not only his professional achievements, but also his personal achievement, his personal belongings. I had to be legally creative, but I managed to get him out of there without personal debt. I felt accomplished, and those are highlights. However, afterwards, a few years later, I would wonder, what if I can take it a step further, which is one of the reasons why I embarked on my business journey.
Fascinating. So, in an old and established profession like the legal profession, you are finding new ways of working and doing different things. Please help me understand with an example. What are you doing differently?
To understand what I'm doing differently, one must understand that in the meantime, I created a different background. As a result, I think different and I operate different. If you look, for example, at Stanford, just to name one, there I was really immersed in innovative thinking, disruptive thinking, and acquired the skills to do so. So client centricity, a win-win mindset, innovative thinking became part of who I am and how I think and how I operate. Currently, I operate at the intersection of legal and business. And this really translates overall in 2 things. On one hand, I provide strategic advice to law firms to unleash the potential of their people and their firms, how to really do things different, how to really approach things different. On the other, I blend my legal and business skills in corporate legal transactions. Having a different approach. For example, did you know research shows 70 to 90% of M&As fails? I consider that rather shocking. That's one of the things I approach different and solve. I'm a legal and a strategic business partner, but I look at the organization as a whole. From my helicopter view, I look for the bottlenecks, I detect the bottlenecks, and I solve the bottlenecks.
Very interesting. And, to have a combination of a lawyer and a strategic thinker can be a huge asset to any transaction. Can you give me 1 or 2 examples of where you have stepped in, without any names, of course?
Well, there are several. It's by bringing it differently. Most of the times in a legal transaction, the things are approached different, isolated, or the focus is on legal. The deal is closed and that's it. We consider it a success and we even call it a closing. However, if you bring it together, if you look, first of all, what's the strategy? Is it even strategically a match? Is it culturally a match? How are we going to accomplish that alignment? And you bring it all together, you get a different approach, and as a result, a different outcome.
Very interesting. So you also mentioned that you've been involved in several path-breaking cases. Help me understand or give me an example of 1 or 2 of them.
What do you mean?
When I was reading about you, you said that you handled some very, very interesting cases.
Yes.
Along where you give the law perspective and a strategic perspective. Can you give me 1 example without any names?
That's difficult to do, to get in more of the details of any case, because it really it depends from Yeah, I'm thinking of several cases, but I'm trying to think how to. Um, it's difficult to give an example of that.
Okay, we'll skip this question then. So my next question is that how did the pandemic, which affected the entire world, how did it affect your work as a lawyer and as a strategic thinker?
But for me, it made, when the world closed down,
Mm.
for me, it opened because everybody was very focused on what we couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the reasons to immerse myself in the whole business journey.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started doing all the courses.
Mm.
And so for me, I saw it really as a way of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Never wasted crisis, so to speak.
Fantastic. So you also say that at the beginning of 2020, you started an intense journey across world-renowned business schools.
Yes.
Tell me about this journey and what was your motivation?
I wanted to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer, if one wants to do things differently, one needs knowledge and skill set to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
If not, one just ends up doing more of the same.
Mm.
We all have been there. We all have seen that junior who says, once I'm in that seat, I will do things different. And once they're in that seat, they just do more of the same.
Mm.
I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
If we look at the legal industry, we all know there is a need of change.
Mm-hmm.
There's a need to innovate, and there's a need to disrupt.
Mm-hmm.
The status quo isn't working, or at least it's no longer working.
Mm.
We need some shaking up to do there. And I really wanted to acquire the skills to do that
Mm-hmm.
in a knowledgeable way. I had my academic. In one hand, I had my profound legal knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I went back into academia and immersed myself into innovation and really doing things differently.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned there, that's a good question,
Mm-hmm.
because I could write a book about it. So the challenging thing for me is how to summarize it in a few minutes.
Okay.
In Oxford, I immersed myself in executive leadership.
Mm-hmm.
In Harvard, in negotiation and remote work.
Okay.
Amidst of the pandemic, that really made sense to me. In Kellogg, in change management and strategy. And then came Stanford, the year-long program on purposeful leadership, corporate innovation, where I really learned to transform, to innovate, and to disrupt organizations.
Mm.
Overall, I became comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the beginning of any innovation.
Mm.
If I had to pick out one lesson, I would say when I embarked on my journey, the bar would tell me all those courses are not relevant for lawyers.
Mm.
Now I would say yes, they are, very much so. They are relevant for lawyers to remain relevant.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, you know, I think you took such amazing advantage of the pandemic to study in such amazing universities. You know, it's fantastic. So you also received 4 Stanford GSP Intellectual Contribution Awards.
Yes.
Tell me about these awards also.
Well, I won 4 Intellectual Contribution Awards. And I got nominated for the other courses. What they stand for, they are a recognition by my peers, my classmates, which in itself is a very exclusive cohort. Mm-hmm. And there are recognition for my contribution to their learnings. Mm. And for me, so that I consider that a huge recognition.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So, you know, even I was again reading about you, and in my introduction, you also sit on several boards. Mm-hmm. Tell me about some of the boards you sit on and the role you play there.
Well, we'll come back to that strategic partner, of course. Mm-hmm. So I'm a strategic thinker, a holistic thinker. Mm-hmm. So in that's overall my role. Mm-hmm. I have several. Most of them are around inclusion, mm-hmm. empowerment, mm-hmm. Gender equality. So right. Things like that, because I consider those things very valuable, very important, and I want to bring my knowledge there to make a difference.
Very interesting. And when you talk of gender equality, what are some of the challenges you face in Europe?
everything really. I mean, that inclusion is hugely underestimated. When we talk about inclusion, most think it's just it's about the others, but inclusion is about everybody. And most limit the conversation to diversity. But diversity is just, well, we should talk about inclusion instead of diversity. That's much more important. And it's about every difference. We are all different in a certain environment, and we should learn to value differences instead of seeing them as a challenge or some negativity. I mean, we should learn to value all those differences in perspectives, because they are our strength. They are really what make and they're also very crucial for innovation. And that's quite often underestimated. Like, if you want to innovate, you need that psychological safety, you need that inclusive environment to make it happen.
And over the years, have you seen inclusion improving in the corporate world in Europe?
I haven't seen it in action, but yes, not in the corporate world in Europe. No, it's not true. There's one organization that I really think they're really high on inclusion. And also, if you think Google, if you think Meta, but that's one of the things I go back to Stanford. It's really diverse by design. And although when inclusion is everywhere in the course, it's so designed, and in the end, you really understand the value of inclusion.
Very interesting.
Because it's in the DNA of the program, it's in the DNA of the course, and it's in the DNA of Stanford. And so, yes, I have seen it in action. I have seen the added value of it. And now for me, it's shocking that it's not everywhere there. Well, not shocking. I know it's a reality, but really convinced me, not by telling me it should be different, but by really doing things different, that the need to implement it in all of the corporate world and in all our organizations, it's a huge need.
Fantastic. So let me move on to some other questions for you. You've had such an amazing career so far. What would you say are 3 key milestones that you can remember?
Well, they don't necessarily have to do with my career.
Okay.
My first milestone would definitely be when I became a mother. And this both when we lost our baby girl, as when I became a mother of our 2 precious boys.
Wow.
Because they are really my inspiration, my catalyst to live by example and to lead by example. So definitely my boys. My second milestone would be when my best friend at college got involved in a car crash. And he had brain damage, coma, he wouldn't survive. And I put my life on hold, and I became his primary caretaker. I went on his rehabilitation. I supported him during his rehabilitation. He would never walk again. He would never talk again.
Wow.
But to this day, I'm still his primary caretaker, and he does walk, and he does talk, and he does have a very valuable life.
Amazing.
Of course, he does have brain damage too. And when people look at my resume, definitely in the legal industry, they see that gap. And most of the times, they don't even ask a question. They just make all kinds of assumptions. And some might even assume that it's not valuable. While I disagree. I disagree very much. Because for me, that time spent was the most valuable thing I could ever have done. And I learned so much more than any job could have taught me in that year time. Because sometimes we all need that supportive hand to make it happen.
Correct. How nice.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
My third would be, that's a professional one, and that definitely would be the journey across business schools.
Wow. Amazing. I mean, the story that you just told me about your friend, I think it is so creditable. And, I'm sure the world must be thanking you for everything that you are doing. So, Eve, moving on, what are some of the core values you believe in? I mean, you're a strategic thinker, lawyer, you're doing so many different things.
My core values, I call them kapir. It's just a word that I have a thing of making words with
Right.
The first is challenge. I really need my brain food. I'm a lifelong learner. I enjoy that. That gives me inspiration. That's my drive. The second is authenticity. Always stay true to your values. But to do that, you have to know what your values are.
Correct.
The second is professionalism. I always value quality. That's also the reason why I went to the best business schools, to learn what to get. The second is the I as inclusion and integrity. And the last one is respect.
Wow.
Always act aligned with your values. And the core values of the core values are integrity and respect.
Fascinating. And when you look at all the diverse things that you are doing, what does success mean to Eve?
For me, success is living a meaningful and content life. Make a positive impact, make a difference, love what I do, and do what I love. I, on purpose, don't use the word happy, because research indicates what we think makes us happy most of the time is not what effectively makes us happy. Because happy is that superficial, short feeling, while if you aim for a meaningful life, that's much more valuable.
Amazing. Amazing. Well said. My next question is, who or what inspires you? I mean, I'm inspired thinking at all the different things that you keep doing so well. What inspires you, or who inspires you?
Well, I already mentioned it shortly, my boys. They are definitely the inspiration and the catalysator. If I look at them, they are my day-to-day inspiration. Live by example, lead by example. Is this the person I want to be, and is this the mother I want to be? So for me, that's a huge one. And that's definitely a number one. Gaining knowledge is very inspiring. For me, a day not learned is a day not lived. So I really have to learn something every day. I'm not saying I have to go on a course every day, but I have to learn something new. Yes, I need that.
Amazing.
That's very important. And quotes. I really have a thing with quotes. I love quotes.
Okay.
I always surround myself with quotes.
Wonderful. That's very unusual inspiration. Wonderful. So I've time for... Go ahead.
I didn't name a person because it's easy to name some famous person as an inspiration. But for me, it's those daily average things that quite often are the most inspirational.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. So Eve, I have time for two more questions. My next question is that, a lot of us learn from our failures. What have been some of your learnings from some of your mistakes?
I like to think of mistakes as opportunities for growth. And one would be when it's time to go, when it's time to move on, go, move on. Always stay true to yourself and your values. But for that, it's important to reflect on those values so that you know what they are, and always follow your path.
Wow.
That's
well said. Well said. And my last question to you, because there'll be a lot of young people who will be listening to our conversation. What would your advice be to a young individual who's starting off on her or his journey in life as a lawyer, manager, entrepreneur?
One would be, it's not because you can do it that you should be doing it. That's one. And reflect for a moment. Take a piece of paper or a document on your computer. I don't care where you put it. And write down for yourself why you're choosing the journey you're doing. Why you want to be a lawyer. Why you want to be a manager. Why did that? Reflect for a moment. It doesn't have to take long. And then occasionally reflect back on that. And what you're doing in your day-to-day work, is that aligned with your purpose, with what is important to you, with those values? If not, where the misalignment is, close the gap, because that's where the motivational issues happen. That's one of the big reasons of the well-being issues, and that's where your meaningful life will be found. It will change during time. Maybe what is important to you now might not be it within 10 years, but I always try to keep an eye on what is important to you, not what others expect from you, but what is important for you, and try to do that in your day-to-day interactions. A second would be, go where you're valued. Don't ever let yourself make small. Go to that environment that supports you in what you bring to the table, that authenticity that you bring to the table. Dare to be you, dare to stand out, and never lose sight of what is important for you.
Wonderful. How nice. Even that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for sharing such an amazing journey you have had, and for sharing a lot of your learnings when you did the round of the business schools in the last few years. And thank you for sharing with me in so much depth your own thoughts about your values, your milestones, what success means to you. And thank you for all your other knowledge that you've given to us. Thank you again, and good luck.
My pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.